Can you all hear me okay? Okay, excellent. Everybody, please sit in the Vajrasana or in the comfortable sitting position. Keep your spine erect, chin away from your chest. Eyes gently closed. Shift your awareness to the center of the eyebrows. To connect to the light of awareness within the Jyotishmati. Let's begin today's session with the opening chant. Om Sahana Vavatu Sahano Bhunaktu Sahaviryam Karavavahai Tejasvinavaditamastu Ma Vidvishavahai. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. And let's also offer our salutations to Maharshi Patanjali. Yogena Chittasya Padena Vacha Malam Shariram Cha Vaidyakena Vyopakarotam Pravaram Muninam Patanjalim Pranjaliranatosmi. Let's offer our salutations to Maharshi Patanjali, who gave us the yoga system and also the speech, the grammar for the speech, and also for Ayurveda, and our big pranam. And I also want to take this opportunity to offer my pranam to Sri Ramji, whose blessings or the knowledge, a little bit of knowledge that I received at Patanjali that I want to share with you. So my sincere pranam to Ekaji and Sri Ramji. So what we want to do today is we're going to cover probably the two most important things. And of course, the two most important is after the next one, which is the meditation. But the two limbs that we more often spend more of our time in our yoga practice, which is asana and pranayama. So there's a lot of intricate details about the asanas and the pranayama that Patanjali defined in the Yoga Sutras. Those are the third and the fourth limbs in the Ashtanga Yoga. So we're going to talk about those two today. And then hopefully we get to cover, there's a lot of content to cover today. If you don't cover some of this stuff, it'll probably roll over into the next session. So without much further ado, let me open the presentation. While I'm doing this, are there any questions from what we covered so far? Probably nothing.
So we did pranam, namaste.
Go ahead.
And we covered the yam. And I mean,
Yama and niyama.
we were, sorry.
Yeah, we covered yamas and niyamas, the first two. The first one is external conduct, and then the second one is self-conduct. Right? Okay. I hope everybody can see my screen now. Okay. So Patanjali defined the asanas. Asana as the one sutra. This is also just like Yogena Chittasya Padena Vacha. This is one of the most quoted sutras about the asanas. And what the Patanjali said is a good posture is sthira sukham asanam. Sthira means stable. Sukham means being in happy. Kam means space. Sukha means relax space, or is this like open, unconstrained space. Being in happy is a good posture. I mean, just like a sutra, alpaksharam asandigdam vishwadomukam saravat, which is like what it basically says is the one that is steady and happy is a good posture. So there are a lot of intricate details behind this. So let's first look at then some analogies. So what it actually means is, like, for example, if you were to take an analogy like a tree is firmly rooted with its roots, yet it has the flexibility, the freedom to move, like the sukham, with its leaves and some of the branches. And that's what is meant by a good posture. First and foremost, in any posture is we have to be first rooted like a tree. We are not shaking. And then in that rooted steadiness is where we are able to express our posture, like the freedom to movement. And that's how we need to, practice a posture. And the other, isn't it a beautiful analogy? Like a tree where, most of the time what happens is whenever we are doing the postures, we are not first rooted in the stability. And what we are doing is, without being stable first, we are trying to go into the final expression. And what happens is you're never getting into the proper asana. So the first and foremost thing that we need to do is making sure that we are first rooted firmly. And then from there, we have to express the final posture so that you're not fidgeting, you're not shaking, and so on and so forth. So like, for example, when we do our Saturday and Sunday, we're always focusing on the stability. And the first and foremost is to keep in Tadasana and, take the help of our breath and then hug yourself tightly and then, go into the expression as opposed to, being shaky and then try to do an expression. Does this make sense? Any questions? Like first you have to be established like a tree and then express, into the posture. Does it make sense?
Yes.
Yeah. And then the second thing is, if you look at the sthira is, if you look at some of the objects like in the sthira, like, for example, if you were to look at something like a chair or a table or a bowling pin, they're all like firmly rooted. Whereas, something that is not sthira is like a sandbag or, some, kind of a pack of pebbles and so on and so forth. If you look at it, something that is stable like a chair, if you want to move, it takes much easier effort compared to if you want to move, a kind of a pile of sand. What do you need to do? You have to literally put it in some kind of a container, like, take it in this and then move. That means, you actually have to put more effort. So what it actually means is in an asana, when you're firmly, rooted in stability, then it actually becomes more easier to express yourself in the final expression. And in fact, we could actually, that's one of the reasons why we always focus on fingers crossed, elbows straight, hug your elbows, tighter to the body, glue your legs together. All these details are trying to keep yourself like, hugging tight to get into the firm, sthira position, so that from that sthira, you are actually able to easily, with little effort, you can actually get into the final expression. And, please try to be aware of this. The more you hug tight and the more firm that you are there, the easier it becomes. With little effort, you actually can actually get into the final expression. And that is a very, very fine detail in terms of the asana. And some of the examples of, so the sthira posture is like, for example, when you're on the plank, you see that you are in one straight line, looking straight. You are in like, as like, you're like one unit. Whereas, if you're not stable, then you're like a curved and, you're shaking or, your fingers are spread in different directions. That is not the proper sthira. So the more you're spread out in different directions, even laws of the physics, you're increasing the more surface area, and the more loose your limbs are, then you have to engage everything to lift everything up. So the key thing is to keep your fingers engaged and hug yourself tight and then express yourself. So that's about the first dimension of the posture. And then the second dimension, any questions on the sthira?
Is this sthira only while doing the yogasana or like everyday activity? Like
in all the activities.
Standing.
Yeah, actually, that's a beautiful question. In fact, what our life expression needs to be like a yoga posture in asana. It means, you need to be rooted in stability. And then then you go express yourself, your body posture, when you're sitting or this. And so, all those things, you need to operate as if like you're in an asana. But asana doesn't mean that you're uptight. The second attribute, what Patanjali said, is sukham. The sukham that means sukham means come in space. Sukham means it's actually relaxed, space. Whereas dukkha means it's a constrained space. If you observe closely, in our body, what is the one thing that is actually expanding? The one that is actually changing space is the lungs. So sukha means you're actually expanding your lungs freely, and dukkha means you're actually, compress or you're exhaling, and then the lungs are getting constrained. So what it essentially means is you have to be able to freely, breathe properly in your posture. I mean, that is one of the biggest attributes of the yoga posture. Your breath needs to be very smooth and deep, and that's the best expression of an asana. Sukham is you're actually creating more space while you are in the posture, and then you're also effortlessly, you're actually inhaling and exhaling. So the way we actually, as a yoga teacher, we know that somebody is in the sukham or not. Sometimes people try to put a fake smile. Actually, it's very difficult to put even a smile if you're not really happy. Is to observe your breath. If your breath is haphazard, or if it's shaky, or if you're holding breath, and sometimes people squinch their eyes and the body and try to get in the posture. And if you actually observe it, that is not actually a posture. And if you actually bring it back to the first limb of yama, you're actually doing ahimsa. Sorry, you're doing himsa. You're actually doing violence. And that's one of the reasons Patanjali defined the yamas and niyamas, the first limbs. So we have to be establishing in those principles and then bring that into your practice of the third limb of the asanas. So the key thing here is to make sure that we are sthira, and then being in happy. In happy means your space, the changing space needs to be one smooth expression. So that means inhale and exhale, and that is a finer detail in any posture. Does it make sense?
Yes.
Yeah. So that is one of the beautiful details of Sthira Sukha Asanam. And then the second sutra, what Patanjali also defined, in fact, out of all the 195, we talked about it, Patanjali only gave about 3 sutras related to asanas. The 2 are the definitions, and then there is one benefit. Compared to that, we spent almost 3 sessions on yamas and niyamas. And then the pranayama, Patanjali gave about 6 sutras, and there are more, some of the adjacent details. So that is the level of significance of the asanas. And it's all about sthira sukham asanam. And then the second one is prayatna shaitilya ananta samapattebhyam. Prayatna shaitilya ananta samapattebhyam. Prayatna means putting effort. Initially, whenever we are attempting the posture, you have to put more effort than what is needed. It almost feels like a struggle, but you're going to do it with the right effort. Always don't focus on the final expression, but focus on stability, and then go express. And then eventually, as you practice, there is another sutra that comes in the 4th chapter, where it says, Kramanyatve parinamanyatva hetuhu. What it means is, every step by step, the small steps of practice that you do every day leads to a major transformation. So it's not about, I already spent, 1 month, I'm still not getting the final standing bow. That's not the attitude. And that's also not vairagya. Abhyasa vairagya abhyam tannirodha. Vairagya means being dispassionate about the final outcomes. Rather, you being in the moment and give the right expression, which is sthira sukham asanam, focusing on the details. And that's what it is. So what it actually means is prayatna. Every posture is about, first it starts with giving the effort. But at the same time, it needs to result in eventually Shaitilya. It becomes effortless. Effort becomes effortless. That's when you get the Ananta Samaipatibhyam. The asana becomes the fine, joyful expression. And you see this in all the other things too. Like, for example, if you're learning music or if you're learning piano, initially, it almost feels like a lot of struggle to master the keys and to master the scales. And you have to practice again and again and again. But as you go deeper into your sadhana, eventually it becomes Shaitilya. It becomes effortless. And then when it becomes effortless, that is when the blissful state comes in, the joy, the Ananta Samapatibhyam, the true efforts of you become that asana. You become the asana. Asana becomes your natural expression of the state. So the key thing is, don't be discouraged by that effort. Prayatna, that's what Patanjali said. You have to put the prayatna. Oftentimes what I see is including myself sometimes, and whether it is in the yogasana, other thing is, we only give about 50%. 50% in expressing, giving our effort. Patanjali said is like, no. You need to actually give 100% or actually 120% to get into the flow state. And initially it may look like, painful, it's a struggle and you're actually doing it, but always give your effort while adhering to Sthira Sukham Asanam, keeping your breath, keeping yourself steady and always, breathing, continuously in a posture. And then as you keep on doing it every day, like what we covered about the abhyasa. Abhyasa is, Satu Dirgha Kala Nairantara Satkara Sevito Drudabhumihi. When you do this over a long period of time without interruption, with full devotion and with a servitude kind of attitude, and eventually you get into the Shaitilya, and that's when you result into the blissful state. Then you become the asana. Does this make sense? Prayatna Shaitilya Ananta Samapatibhyam. And in any work, when the effort, our goal is to become, effort becomes effortless. And that's when we have actually achieved the final excellence of an expression. Right? That is the flow state. That's the flow state, where we don't even think that we are actually putting an effort, because we are totally immersed in the final expression. Prayatna Shaitilya Ananta Samapatibhyam. Any questions on this?
Nothing for me.
Okay. So then Patanjali basically said, okay, now if we do all these things, then what are the benefits that I'm going to get with asanas? And Patanjali defined it as tato dvandva anabhigataha. Tato dvandva anabhigataha. Anabhigataha means, dvandva means by practicing asanas using this Sthira Sukham Asanam and Prayatna Shaitilya Ananta Samapatibhyam, the first and foremost is dvandva. Dvandva is conflicts. The conflicts within our body and mind, anabhigataha. Anabhigataha means they will be reduced. They will not be completely eliminated. And what did Patanjali say earlier? How do we eliminate all the miseries? Heyam dukkham managatam. And that is by following the full Ashtanga Yoga. That's when you actually eliminate all the miseries. And when you get into the final dhyana is when you get all the miseries will be eliminated. But what asana will do is it actually reduces the conflicts within your body and the mind, so that you can move on to the next stage, which is like, the next stage, you're more prepared to get into more of the meditation, so that you can actually completely eliminate all the miseries. So some of the examples of dvandva. Though, like, for example, every day we are in this battle every day. The battle between, like, for example, in our body, we always have this dvandva between our tongue and then our stomach or the rest of the body, right? Our tongue wants, the tasty food, like a donut or coffee or, some nice wine or cheese or whatever, right? Or laddu. But then, body wants, more nutritious food, like, sprouts or vegetables and the fruits and things like that. So we are constantly engaged in this dvandva. And similarly, in your mind, you would want to, watch, some nice, Criminal Minds or Netflix. Apparently there is a popular series called Criminal Minds. Your mind wants, all kinds of action, thriller, drama, and all the kind of, stuff. But your mind wants more of a sattvic, kind of an emotional experience, or more masala Bollywood movies versus something like a sattva. Those are the kind of a conflicts. So what Patanjali said is, by regularly practicing asanas, those conflicts will be reduced. So, for example, this tongue versus stomach kind of the battle. What happens is eventually your tongue starts liking, tongue becomes more and more in harmonious with what is nutritious to you. Actually, we see that, right? People who are practicing asanas or, other kinds of things, eventually their food habits will change. Your food habits will change. In fact, they will start enjoying more and more things. For example, I could look at myself. Now, in the evening, I look forward to eating my sweet potato, or some carrots and this and stuff. I mean, it doesn't mean that I've completely eliminated all the miseries, but more and more, we actually start liking the food that is more nutritious. Similarly, for your mind, the conflicts, of, what do you like to watch? You get more joy listening to Sanskrit channel, or listening to Sadhguru channel, or listening to some beautiful music versus you don't have a taste for Criminal Minds. So this is one of the things that Patanjali revealed as the benefits of asanas is tato dvandva anabhigataha. Does this make sense? Does it feel like it's something that is anavadyam? In other words, something that cannot be refuted?
Yeah, this is very much true. Go ahead.
Sorry, go ahead. Dvandva comes between tongue, mind, and body. For example, my example is I was able to quit cold turkey, not having sugar in my coffee. One day I decided I don't want sugar in my coffee. Somebody who took 2 teaspoons of sugar in coffee.
I see,
One day, cold turkey, I said, I don't want to drink, I don't want to put sugar in mine. Until today, it's been almost 4 or 5 years, I haven't taken sugar. But there are other areas where I have got back on the horse and fallen down. There is so much dvandva between mind, tongue, and body constantly. But some I'm able to achieve, as you said, with the easy, without any pain. Why there is some areas is there is a constant battle.
Yeah, true,
like I know I want it. I know it's not like I dislike it. Like, I know I want it, but it's not easily accomplished as easy as this one was.
Actually, this is a beautiful question. I mean, I think what Patanjali said is, he did not say that, all your conflicts will be fully eliminated. He only said, anavigata, only reduced. In fact, there is this one example that Sri Ramji gives. Apparently, there is this one of the, when he was a kid, when he was going to his yoga teacher, and there is some kind of a calculations. Somebody said like, hey, there's one student wants to master the scorpion posture, which is one of the very difficult posture. And then the Guruji basically said, hey, what do I need to do? And then so, you need to practice like this, and it will take about 3 months. And this guy has been practicing. And then he's able to get a little bit, but, he's not fully perfected it. And then when he went to the master, and he basically said like, hey, I haven't mastered this. I'm unable to get the final expression. And then apparently the teacher said is, instead of actually teaching any techniques, he apparently said, go do meditation. It's very counterintuitive, right? I think perhaps for some of the other things to be completely eliminated, we probably need to go deeper in other limbs of the Ashtanga Yoga. Perhaps in a more deeper pranayama, perhaps in a more deeper meditation, and some of the other limbs are probably not fully developed, to actually get rid of all the conflicts.
Probably I can add a bit. Jai Guru.
Yeah.
Jai Guru. So this is how, I mean, when I look back myself, so 30 years back, 20 years back, 10 years back, so on, I could see this interesting concept. In order to go beyond something, there are two ways. Either you go through it, or you just understand it and it dissolves. Right? So, in the sense, let's say there is enough. Let's say somebody wants to be a brahmachari. He doesn't want to get married. Right? He wants to be a saint. Let's say. He could have practiced or observed in his layers, many layers available. And he has all the substratum there. And the last one left over is just a simple understanding. That is, he can see the rest of the world and see, oh, you know what? This ultimately is another bondage. If he sees that way, then he has enough maturity there where with that understanding, he'll just go beyond. But for somebody who has to feel it, experience throughout the body, it reverberates throughout the body. I mean, whether it is like one of my masters, one of my gurus, he was very interested in artipan. What is it? Banana. Very as if addicted, basically. Whenever he sees a banana, he cannot resist. So what he used to do was, when I went on saw him, he's like, I don't know why I am so addicted. So he used to take that banana and put it all over his skin on throughout the body, not just eat. Right? He used to put it all over the body and then just see what happens. I mean, is it that strong in me? Right? And eventually it fell down. Right? So this is how it is, in the sense. Also, I feel I talk about this 10 idli story, in the sense. There's one gentleman who goes to some restaurant. Sorry, Srinji, if I'm going beyond.
No. Go, please continue. We are here to change your points of view.
Yeah. So there is a small story here. One gentleman goes to a restaurant, eats one idli, and then gets asked for a second idli. They put the second idli. And he goes on eating, and it becomes 9, and finally it becomes 10. So he's done with the 10th idli. Then he's very happy. Then he's done. He goes to the counter to pay the money. There he says, this 10th idli is the one which filled me. And he says, I want to pay for this 10th idli, because that is the guy actually which filled me. But the rest of the folks around him definitely laugh at it. Say, that is not the way it works. Business doesn't work that way. You have to pay for all the 10 idlis. Right? So this fulfillment of any kind, food, wanting, of any kind, all those 9 idlis are equally important as the 10th idli. That's what we miss. So when we like certain things, or when we crave certain things, once it is broken into 10 different levels, filling those either through understanding or going through it. Even none of our Maharshis, even my masters, it's all about, the Rishi Parampara is all married Parampara. There is no, like our Abrahamic religions, there is no non-marrying concept. Right? No. Not that I'm not at a stage to comment about the great Maharshis, but coming back to our system, this is what I Kam kanevadu moksha kam kaledu, right? That is very straightforward as either you to go beyond, either you have to go through, or just with understanding, there comes a day when things fall off on their own. Right? For example, this Ramakant who is talking to you on the call, right? Non-vegetarian is such a big obsessive thing, right? Anyway, I can go long about it. But anyway, right now, it's been 30 years. I have dropped it. But there were stages when it was again, probably they came up. But as I said, like Sneji said, again, going back to once we start experiencing those depths of the other limbs, the other things automatically get filled. How, when, why? I think we are not dressed as Sriniji and me, but it will happen for sure. So with that, back to you, Srini.
Thank you. I think this is something is a very profound thing. Thank you, Ramakanchi. I equate this to my own experience, but I also let me actually project it a little bit, in a broader sense. Today in US, most of the yoga practice has become more of an asanas expression. So, and there is no awareness of, other limbs. There is no education on yama principles. There is no education on niyama. So when you are not established in what is the right way to conduct yourself towards others, and right way to conduct yourself, towards your own self, or, the meditation, other things, what happens is you will get some control on some things. I mean, I know some of the people who are like mastered, like, final expressions. I mean, they can balance, they can do gymnastics. But if I watch some of their behaviors, they smoke weed and they commit some kind of violent activities. And, they do engage in, some of the non-socially harmonious activities because they are not strengthening in, they're not going deeper in other limbs. And that's one of the unfortunate things about what yoga has become. It has become more of a physical expression. And one of the things that we want to deliberately focus on is how do we bring more awareness to the holistic yoga system, the 8 limbs Astavangani, which is where how Patanjali actually wanted it to be, where he only gave about three sutras for the asanas, but focused everything else on other dimensions that we need to go deeper so that we can actually reduce all the conflicts. In fact, some of these yogis that I'm very close to when I travel with them on some of these yoga competition, and in fact, I could even use me as an example. I mean, even today, I occasionally, when I go on business trips or on Fridays and this stuff, I still cannot overcome some of my conflicts. I engage in, I collect wine and then do that. I mean, something that I'm not proud of, something that I want to get rid of. All it means is I'm not investing enough in other limbs. Like perhaps I'm not doing enough meditation. I know that for a fact. So you could see me doing all
what happens. What happens there is this meditation, people talk about. So basically pretty simple. It is said as a state where nowhere to go, nothing to get, and nothing to do. Right? Nowhere to go, nothing to get, and nothing to do. So once this is being practiced, or you just be there, just the state of, instead of doing state, you just be in the being state. It could be 30 seconds initially, it could be whatever. So again, going back to my example, I would say very fortunate. Just the first initiation was very deep unknowingly, and everything changed for me. But then I thought it is automatic for everybody on the planet. But later I realized that no, it is not the case. So when we stay in a yoga nidra for some time or any meditation, like Sriniji said, right? The delta states could have been for a few moments also. It could be a satori. It may not be a samadhi. But as we ground and stay more and more, interestingly, I have found that you do not, the rest of the time when you're even awake, right? Other time I don't do any meditation. But interestingly,
that penetrates throughout the being. And it so penetrates that even in your dream, right? Even in your sleep, there are no dreams at all. It is like a blank state. And when I was 18 and when I asked my mentor about dreams or something, he said, what? I do not know. I don't get any dreams, he said. I was so shocked when he said that. And now, so many years I've been experiencing that, oh, wow, this is amazing. Right? That part of it happened. With that, back to sleep.
Yeah. I think, there is an element of, sorry, somebody has a comment? So I think, let me wrap this. I think, what Patanjali rightly said, Dvandva Anabhigatha, the conflicts will be reduced, but not completely eliminated. What it means is we just have to strengthen the other muscle. So Savita ji, if it's any comfortable to you, I don't have any sugar or salt in my house, for quite some time. In fact, I only eat quinoa and some of this stuff. So that element of, my dimension is there, but then I also have some nice collection of, nice wine bottles. So that means I haven't perfected other limbs and other limbs.
No, I don't want to deny anything myself, because I think the more I deny and say that my inner self will be a huge battle, which I don't want to get into the battle at all. My aim is to detach. Like, if tomorrow when I go to somebody's house, they put a sugar in my coffee, I'll drink it. It's not like I'm going to die out of sugar. I mean, so that is the Vairagya. Now, one glass of wine, it's something that you enjoy. That's it. But I think my aim is, like, I love coffee. So I live coffee for a month. So what I'm trying to get is, like, how come I'm able to, like, in April, I'm planning to not drink coffee for a month. It's just, that's me practicing. But I can do that without just a click of a button, it happens. But some things, like, for example, getting up early in the morning.
It is basically, it is.
Sorry, I think, one thing is, Ramakanji, I think one thing that you say is there is a Vyudhana Samskara and then there is a Nirodha Samskara. I think, one of the examples that we all say is, the stronger, the deeply penetrated that impression within you, it takes that much effort to get rid of it, right? And, the impressions could be whatever. I mean, I don't have a straight answer, but what you've been doing is perhaps you're strengthening that Nirodha Samskara by doing more meditation, or by being aware of satsang and, all the other limbs. Sometimes, it gets, do that. Some of them take a little bit longer time, but that's a deeper stage of what we need to go through. I think,
and also, like Osho adds to this. He all he says is, just one thing, do whatever you do, it doesn't matter. I think it is only the amount of witnessing, awareness, and observance, right? These three, either you can say awareness, basically. So once this torchlight of awareness is going on being put in, the jewels go, whether you call it the jewels or the restrictedness, right? They show up anyways. So that is all the game that happens. So the more aware, the more light we put in, it becomes that easy.
Exactly. I think, Savita-ji, I think, what you said is actually so profound. I think, one is we should not suppress it, because once you're suppressing, you're actually forcefully controlling something. The thing is, as long as you maintain this Vairagya expression, where you can simply flow through it, if you want to enjoy a glass of wine or coffee and something, but, don't be too judgmental about it, simply flow through it. But if you're clinging to it, which is like, when there is a clinging, is, oh, I need to have this, the wine on this particular day, or I want to have this. That's when you have not mastered it. But if you are there occasionally, if you're enjoying it and then don't stick to it, I think, that's also perfect. You're flowing through every expression, but without leaving a residue behind. Actually, that's what one of the benefits of meditation that we will learn. Tatra dhyanajam anashayam. Any action that you perform without anashayam. Anashayam means without any residue. Then you are in the meditative state. And that is one of the, in fact, there's a Yajnavalkya, I think, says, even though they're married, they can actually claim themselves as brahmacharis.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And that is the whole purpose. In fact, that is the whole purpose for marriage, is to two souls coming together in a lackness, exchange the fullness and make sure they pour completely into each other's cup. So full.
Yeah,
right?
actually,
that is the whole purpose.
Yeah, actually, the thing is that's not, or at least what they basically say is, because in the state of meditation, you don't approach there from a sense of lack. You're still there in the full, and you just go through the union. The whole place whole becomes whole, right? It's like Purna Vedam, Purna Vedam. And then when a marriage of the union comes into any kind of this boundaries, oh, okay, now I have my kids, I have my this, I'm doing any action because you're doing out of that relationship. The moment that relationship creates a sense of separation between you versus rest, then that is not brahmacharya. So when the reason why they're able to actually practice this brahmacharya while being married is because they're devoid of any chatter of duality between the wife or their family versus something else. Because they are in that equanimous state, they're already full even before the partner. They're full with the partner, Purna Purnamidam. So in that state, they can claim themselves as, the brahmacharya even while married. And that's because all the actions that they're doing at the time, they do not have any residue because they don't have any expectations. There is no give and take. They're fully expressing themselves because they're full. They're offering their love. And the other person receiving is also offering in their love. So there is no residue. Purna Purnamidam. That is the pure meditative state. And then you can actually call themselves as Tatra Dhyana Jamanashaya. Right? So we can actually get into that.
Yeah, with human beings, haven't had much luck, but but I'm trying that with materialistic things like coffee. Like I don't want any of those things power over me. So
apparently,
yeah, but it's very funny that it's in one area it happens. Like I decide today, and from tomorrow it's happening.
Maybe we'll unlock the key, with moving on.
I'm interested to know what is that going through it. Like, what do you mean by going through it?
I see. No, going through.
I mean, basically releasing, right? See, basically, once when we are, let's say, I crave for something, right? Or I want to have it. You allow it to settle in every cell of the body, right? It's not when we are eating, right? You like that particular thing again and again and again. 100 times you feel the same craving. But the moment you start to eat it in silence mode, right, without any distraction, and allow the taste. In fact, I am not sure whether you have experienced this in all our advanced classes, even in our regular yoga classes. I used to do this process where they give a small piece into your hand. Food meditation, basically, we say, is it is not the quantity of the food. It is the light that you have put on the thing that you're consuming, which fills in more than the material part of it. And we have experienced this thoroughly. I mean, it's not, I don't know how to express this out, but we have done it hundreds of times in our camps. And I have experienced this hundreds of times while I was a participant as well as when we run it.
I think this is
please go ahead. Yeah.
Ramakantji, what we actually call this as being one-pointedness. So the thing is, most of the time when you are actually experiencing, I mean, in fact, when I remember 2006, when I went into the Art of Living first part 1 course, they would give a small grape.
Exactly.
And then that small grape, they would want you to touch it, feel it, and then, look at it and, experience all the things. Then when you're in the mouth, how do you then...
Yeah, even before the mouth, right? Then you do the prayer thing.
Exactly.
So, Pujaniya, this Ahuti, right? Brahmarpanam Brahmavihi means this food, the Brahman in the food, is going and quenching the Brahman in the Arpana, right? Prana Apana Samayuktaha. So all that happens. So everything becomes Pujaniya, basically. So what are we telling ultimately? Just the light that we put on here changes. And aap jo bole hain, the other one is also very true. Suppression leads to depression. Pretension leads to tension. Right? So that is also very important. Yes. No, any kind of suppression really. With that, back to
yeah, I think this we talked about in the strategies to overcome the thing, which is like one of the techniques is Vishayavativa Prabhuttirutpanna Manasa Nibandhanaha, right? Which is like, how do we achieve that one-pointedness, with the food that you're consuming, with everything that you're doing, to be able to go observe and go to the finest and finest details. That's one of the techniques. And then the technique where if you are unable to control a desire, one of the things that Patanjali also said is vitarka badhane pratipaksha bhavana, like as an example, right? Which is like, for example, if your mind wants to get into coffee, instead of saying like, hey, dude, please don't give me the thought of not drinking coffee, basically said, can you actually think about an oppositing, more positive, inviting thought, which is like, perhaps you go shift it and go into a lemon juice, or maybe some kind of a smoothie, or something, inviting more opposite thought, might be able to do this. I mean, there are a lot of techniques that we actually covered, but the most important thing is to be able to being and then aware. The biggest test on whether you mastered this, the one-pointedness or this stuff is when you don't have any judgment, which is like, hey, why is this happening? That means you haven't, established the vairagya bhavam. When you're inviting, if you need to drink a coffee without any chatter, go drink the coffee, enjoy it in the moment, and then you just get out. But when you're enjoying it, be one-pointedness. When you are there, enjoy the coffee in its all finest details, so that you can actually, get exuberance from that expression, and then just leave out. Once you're checked out, then you're done. The moment if it doesn't leave any residue, where if it actually comes back, it is like, oh, that coffee that I tasted, it looks so good, let me go try it. Then you have not mastered it. But when I'm not there, I think this is probably what it is. When you're in the moment, how do you exuberantly express yourself in the 100%, be in the one-pointedness? But when you step out, as long as it doesn't cling you, then I think we've gotten there. So I know we've covered it. This is, let's move on to the pranayama. This is one of the most fantastic, fascinating subjects for me. In fact, today I probably listened to Sri Ramji's talk probably about 2 times, to fully understand, all the different dimensions of it. So the Patanjali, the way he defined pranayama is tasmin sati swasha prashvayohu gati vichedaha pranayamaha. So tasmin sati, that means when you are established in that asana, sati, which is like when you are established in the asana, then swasa, what would you then focused on? Swasa prashvayoho, your inhale and exhale. When it has gati vichedaha, gati means the movement of your inhale and exhale. Vichedaha means when it is regulated. That inhale and exhale, when it is regulated, when you're established in that asana, the sthira sukham, and then you are actually controlling your inhale and exhale, that is what is defined as pranayama. This is a very simplistic definition, right? The vichedaha, we've actually, and then, Patanjali defines, there are about nine attributes of what pranayama is. And we are going to get into that. And that regulation, as an example, in the Ujjayi, we use our throat as a way of regulating. And in the Anulom Vilom, alternate nostril, we use our nostril as a way thing. And then in the Brahmari, we close all our senses. And then Shitkari, we use our tongue. So we use different, it's called desha, different places. Desha means, different points of awareness in your different points in your body. We use different points in our body to actually regulate the breath. So that is what is pranayama. Then what is prana? I mean, this is beautiful, actually. Prana is not actually breath. Prana is the life force. There is one definition of prana is prakarshena anati gacchati tasmat pranaha, which is anati. Anati means, which is one that is the movement. And then the one that is actually, anati is the energy, and then gacchati is one that is actually creating the movement. The one that is energizing every cell in the body, energizing and creating the life force within us. And then one that moves through our entire system is called prakarshena anati gacchati tasmat pranaha. So there is an analogy for this. So literally, the Purusha that we talk about, tada drashtuhu, is equivalent to, Bhagavad Gita explains it, it's like the sun. there is a sun that is actually expressing through us. That energy is actually the self, the Purusha is expressing like a sun. And then the light, the sun rays are the prana. In fact, the entire sun rays give life to this entire life in the planet. Similarly, the prana is the one that's actually creating the full life force for everything, our intellect, our limbs, and our sensory perception, everything. That is the one that is lighting up everything through us. It's like the sun rays. So prana is actually the most important vital force that is happening in our system. And it's very different from the breath. Like, for example, breath only covers your lungs, whereas prana actually covers your entire body, and it goes into deeper layers of your intellect and the mind and so on and so forth. So it's an essential life force like the sun rays. But of course, both prana and the breath leave at the same time when you leave this costume. And the other difference is, like, for example, your breath could be cold or warm, but prana is always warm. It is that tapas, it's that sun rays, it's creating that anati gacchati tasmat prana, right? And then Patanjali defined this, what is pranayama. He actually defined about 9 attributes. First is bahyadhyantara stambhavrittihi desha kala sankhya and pradarshito dirgha sukshmaha. So what it actually means? Bahya means, taking the full inhale, taking the air from outside. That is the first thing. That is the full, we also call that as kumbhaka. And then abhyantara, which is like, exhaling, which is like, you are actually, we call that as, rechaka, where, you are exhaling completely. Stamba is actually holding. So we always, do in the pranayama, which is like, take a deep inhale and then exhale and then the hold. Those are the first 3 vrittis. Those are the acts. And then what it also says is desha. We also focus on one point in our body. Like, different types of pranayama, we actually shift our awareness to one point in your body. Like, ujjayi means throat or different elements. The desha, sometimes, what we can also do is we can actually shift our awareness to, while we can use any one of the body part to regulate the gati vichedaha. We can actually use it to control the breath, but we can also shift our awareness to the center of the eyebrows, because this is where the 2 nostrils meet. And that also is one right way of doing pranayama. That is desha. Kala is, which is like, the time, how long you actually, do it, the inhale and exhale. What is the duration? In fact, Hatha Yoga Pradipika and different, things, they have, different counts. Like, for example, one of the things that we do in the Hatha Yoga Pradipika is 1, 2, 4. So in other words, if you inhale or 1, 4, 2, which is like, if you inhale for 4 counts, then you hold for 16 counts and then you exhale for 8 counts. So that is what is the final stage of pranayama when you master the pranayama. So that is kala. And then sankhya, how many counts, how many repetitions that you need to do. And then pradarshito, which is like, you're also keeping your awareness on the breath that you're doing, keeping being a witness to this entire, pranayama activity. And then dirgha sukshma, and it is very long and steady, which is like, with full force when you're doing the ujjayi breath, which is like, with full effort, and then it's very strong, dirgha and sukshma. At the same time, it's also subtle. Dirgha and sukshma. A real good pranayama conforms to these 9 attributes as defined by Patanjali. Does that make sense? In fact, when you go to Art of Living and other things, they actually give you these counts. Like, for example, ujjayi, they basically says like there is 3-stage pranayama, and then their count is slightly different, which is like, 4, 6, and 4 or something like that. 4, 4, and then 6. But everybody has a count. And then they basically says like, do the stage 1 for 10 counts and this stuff. So literally every pranayama that we are actually practicing we need to make sure that we have these three phases, which is deeper inhale, exhale, and the hold, and then shift your focus on one point in the body, which is the desha, or keep your attention to the center of the eyebrows, or could be different chakras too, depending upon the school stream of yoga that you're practicing. And then the time, how long do you want to inhale and exhale? There are different counts, and then how many repetitions that you want to do, and then being the witness, being fully aware of your breath while you're doing it, and then dirgha sukshma, make sure that it's very steady and strong and subtle. That is what is a good pranayama. And then the next one, which is a very, this actually goes into the Advaita principle, the Mandukya Upanishad. I think, I'm just going to briefly touch on it, and then we'll expand on it, a little bit more. Bahyabhyantara Vishayaksheptaha Chaturdaha. What it actually means is, we talked about in the previous sutra, we talked about the three states, which is inhale, hold, and exhale. But there is a fourth state, which is actually the most profound. For those folks who come to our Saturday and Sunday class, we try to experience that, which is that after you exhale, it's called Kevala Kumbhakar. So after you exhale, that's that state where, and you hold, and the breath stops actually. After you exhale, in a deeper rapid exhalation, the breath stops. And that's the fourth state. That's what is that's where the breath stops. And when the breath stops, mind suddenly becomes arrested. It becomes thoughtless. And that state of thoughtless mind is Chaturdaha. That's the fourth state. And the Mandukya Upanishad, that's also defined as the Chaturtha. It's also known as Turiyam. The Turiyam, these three states are also, Mandukya Upanishad equates it to the three Om sounds like Aum, and they also map to the three stages of reality, like Jagrati, Sushuptam, Jagrati, Swapna, Sushuptam. And then the fourth state is when there becomes no mind, and that is known as Turiyam. And that Turiyam is the Brahman state. That is our true consciousness. That is our true identity of the self. So pranayama, we experience this Chaturtha, like for example, after you do the Kapalabhati, we do the rapid Kapalabhati, and then we try to exhale completely, and then you hold. Or when you do the Kapalabhati or Bastrika or Art of Living Sudarshan Kriya, Isha, Sambhavi Mudra, they do the rapid, inhalation, exhalation, and then they basically, suddenly the breath stops and you hold it. And that is to give us a glimpse of that Turiyam state, which is our true identity, which is that the silence after Om, which is that pervasive, the consciousness that is always, the witness that is always lighting within us. That's the Surya. So we'll talk a little bit more about this Turiyam state and what Patanjali defined as the benefits of the pranayama, which is that tatakshiyate prakasha avaranam. So the clouds, the smoke that is covering our sun rays, the sun, that self to act in all our actions, what happens is, we are covering it with smoke, with this tamas. Avaranam is the smoke, which is the tamas. That tamas, when you're doing this pranayama practice, the tamas and that smoke is going to be cleared. It is like the smoke will be there, and then the light, the sun rays are going to be reflected. So you're actually going to project the self in our actions. So you will be exuberating, we'll be expressing that radiance in our actions. So pranayama, the fact that Patanjali gave about 6 sutras compared to asanas in 3 times. Pranayama is probably 2 times more important than asanas. In fact, if you're doing 20 minutes of asanas, you should dedicate pranayama at least 40 minutes. So what that means is, in asana, sthira sukham, always practice your postures with pranayama, and then create some extra time for pranayama. So we'll talk a little bit more about tatakshiyate prakasha avaranam. So what I'm going to do is, let's chant Om 3 times. Hopefully it connects to when you're doing this, map it to is that reality of the Jagrati, the awakened state. And then U is mapped to the Swapna, when you're sleep, the dream full of sleep, or sometimes also called as the REM sleep. And then Sushuptam, which is the dreamless sleep, which is almost like the Yoga Nidra, but as unconscious dreamless sleep. And that's the third state. Aum is maps to that. And then the Chaturtha is the silence that comes after, when you completely exhale with the Aum, and then when you observe that finest movement, and that is the real who we are. So let's chant Om 3 times, Aum 3 times, and let's shift our attention to the silence after Om, and then we'll conclude the session for today. Everybody, take a deep breath. Chant Om. Here is a sloka from Adi Shankara explaining the Turiya state, that who we are. Pratasmarami idi samspurat atma tattvam Satchit sukham paramahamsa gatim turiyam Yat swapna jagara sushushuptim avaiti nityam Tad brahma nishkalam aham nacha bhuta sangaha. We are not this body or the mind. We are our awakened dreams and dreamless sleep are not the states. It's the Turiyam, is our real identity. That is the Brahman. And that's the Atman. Let's sing the final prayer. Om Sarve Bhavantu Sukhinaha Sarve Santu Niramayaha Sarve Bhadrani Pashyantu Ma Kaschid Dukkha Bhag Bhavet Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Let's rub our palms. Generate the fire and love of knowledge. Cup our eyes and transmit this knowledge to give us the divine vision, to see things clearly the way they are. And slowly and gently, at your own pace, with a bright smile, open your eyes. Thank you all for sharing your satsang with me, and what a wonderful discussion. Hope you all liked it. If you have any questions and comments as you reflect and ponder on pranayama, and perhaps all of you could take this as an action item to practice yoga and pranayama really well. And we'll see you back on Saturday.
Thank you. Good night.
Namaste. Good night.